Welcome back to Sailing Moxie. I'm Matt. In this video, I'll highlight some of the first repairs and upgrades completed on Moxie, my Hunter 54 sailboat, leading up to the stepping of the mast. Here is a quick preview of how things turned out. The rigging looks much cleaner now and is in better condition than when I bought her, as you'll see in some of the following photos. In the last video, I showed you the move to the new boatyard in Port Charlotte, Florida. Moxie was delivered by truck. For the move, her mast was taken down by the boatyard in St. Pete and it rode with her on the lowboy trailer. Upon arrival, the mast immediately went into protected storage for a few weeks while I engaged with some professional marine contractors to begin work. The shrouds and rigging hardware also went into storage. We did a few other things to prepare the boat for several months on the hard, like place copper wool in the through hulls to allow for drainage, but to protect against insects. We used copper instead of steel wool to avoid rust. But I didn't want this boatyard to become Moxie's graveyard, like it does for so many boats. And I wanted to get started right away on some rigging work and get the mast stepped fairly quickly. Judging from a picture like these sheaves in this block, there was certainly some refurbishment and replacement that needed to be completed with her rigging, so rigging was one of the first things we attacked. As all the sailors out there know, anytime the mast is down, it's time to evaluate its parts and check for any deficiencies, because it's much easier to make these repairs on the ground than hanging 50 feet in the air on a swaying mast. The manager at the boatyard recommended an outside rigger who was well regarded in the area. For anyone refitting a boat, if you need professional work, your local boatyard and marina managers are great resources for finding solid workers for a wide range of tasks at the right price. You'll want to develop good relationships with these people and seek out their advice. One of the first items we refurbished were the spreaders. The spreaders on a mast deflect the shroud cables that support the mast and balance the bend in the mast from the forces induced while sailing. As you can see from these pictures, the spreaders were well worn and weathered, and the metal was a bit pitted. But the work needing to be done was mostly cosmetic. The riggers sanded, primed, and painted these. This was a quick, easy win, and the spreaders looked great after the work. The spreaders get placed into these slots on the mast shown by the red arrows on the left. But I also wanted to point out in this photo that Moxie has rod rigging instead of wire cable rigging, as you can see on the right. Each type of rigging has its own pros and cons. The mast had previously been painted, and there were several areas that were flaking where the bare metal was exposed. This was not just a cosmetic fix, but it could only lead to further pitting and corrosion of the aluminum. The riggers washed down the entire mast and sanded and painted the areas that were bare metal to protect against further damage. It was also a good time to replace all the exterior light fixtures, not just on the mast but on the entire boat. This included the tricolor and anchor light, as well as the steaming deck light. I had all these replaced with LEDs instead of incandescent lights. They were a bit more expensive, but they require less power and should last longer. Moxie had an older Raymarine wind instrument, and after speaking with the rigger, we settled on replacing it with a new Raymarine I-60 wind instrument and display. The riggers also ran all new wiring throughout the mast so I could set sail with new components in those harder to reach places aloft. We also replaced the old VHF radio antenna with a new VHF and Automatic Identification System, or AIS, as well as the associated coax cable and fittings. As a note, here is the single sideband or SSB antenna attachment cable coiled around a winch. We held off reinstalling this or replacing it until I could get back to the boat myself and assess the communication suite. This cable would normally go up the backstay. All the lines were addressed for condition and sizing to make sure we had appropriate lines for the running rigging. Some of the lines were 5/8 of an inch, but some of the rigging hardware was more appropriate for 1/2 inch lines, so we replaced the ones we felt necessary. We also replaced the topping lift for the boom with a wire with an adjustable tail instead of a rope that was in bad condition. The riggers also looked at the furling lines and the sheets for the head sails, as well as the furling drums themselves. An assessment of the condition of Moxie sails will come down the road in the refit process. Here is the mast boot that resides on deck. I want to point out that for a Hunter 54, the base of the mast rests here on the deck, and the mast does not extend through the cabin to rest on the keel as in some other boats. Instead, there is an A-frame that can be seen in this interior shot from inside the forward cabin looking aft. This A-frame distributes the weight of the mast and compression load from the shrouds to the structural frame below the sole of the cockpit that connects to the hull and the keel. And here is the mast finally being stepped. That's one of the riggers up top being hoisted by the crane. There was only a slight delay of a week to our plans caused by high winds in the area. Here are some additional photos and clips after most of the work was completed. To recap, I purchased Moxie in July 2016, I had her moved to the new boatyard in August just a few weeks later, and the mast went back up right in the middle of December. One of my goals after the boat first arrived at the boatyard was to have the mast up as soon as possible because that was a major step in getting her ready for the water. I just didn't want her to sit as half a boat for too long. The rigging work and other work came in within my cost expectations, and the work turned out great. Overall, Moxie had pretty solid rigging to begin with, but it was a good idea to assess everything and complete some repairs and refurbishment right off the bat. All of a sudden, with the mast up, I had a sailboat again, and we were one major step closer to our goal of having her back in the water. In the meantime, during the rigging work, there were other small projects going on. One of these projects was putting down temporary floorboards to replace some that were previously damaged. This was so that work could be carried out inside the cabin without always having to step over open bilge compartments. So there you go. Small steps, but some good initial progress towards Moxie's refit. If you'd like to follow the progress of Moxie's refit and her future adventures, please be sure to subscribe to this channel. For Sailing Moxie, I'm Matt, and we'll see you next time.